So as everyone knows, Gun is an associate professor at Cornell. He is the founder and the CEO of Ava Labs. And of course, he's also founder and co-director of IC3.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ari, and thank you everyone for coming by. I'm coming to you today from southern Turkey, and with severe fires and all sorts of infrastructure issues around me. So I apologize in advance for the connectivity problems that I've been having today. I want to talk to you about consensus protocols. And I guess I should talk a little bit about in what capacity I'm talking to you. I've been cautioned by Ari and others that IC3 has a policy involving clarification of roles. So I am a faculty member at Cornell University, and I want to generally talk to you about consensus protocols in general, but I'm also the CEO of Ava Labs, and Ava Labs is commercializing what I think is the latest innovation in consensus protocols known as the Avalanche Protocol. And my goal today is to advance to the point where we talk about Avalanche. I will try to, in general, I think to the extent that I have a reputation, I earned it by being fair and square at every level. And so I will try to say everything like it is, but you should all know that maybe I will stretch or whatever. Like, I don't know what people worry about, but you should know that there is, that I am indeed the CEO of Ava Labs, and that might taint my value judgments. But in general, I don't think you'll hear a value judgment. I think what you'll hear is a short description of consensus protocols. So let's see, let's get started here. And let me see if I can share my screen and create some kind of, it's going to create this. That's good. I'm going to turn off my camera. Do you need to? Well, maybe I'll let the camera be. But let me get my my slides up here. And let's go to this view. Okay, I want to talk to you about consensus protocols in general. So blockchains, as you know, are a big deal. They've reached the stage in language evolution where they don't require the notion of an article. You don't get to talk about a blockchain. We don't get to talk about the blockchain. Instead, what we talk about is, if you're in Lower Manhattan, two very well-dressed people will typically be walking down the street, and one of them will turn to the other and say, "What's your strategy for blockchain?" So it gets this treatment that I think is reserved for proper nouns. And the only one, or the best one that I know that compares, is the word God. So it's achieved an amazing status. This new asset class that has emerged around blockchains, around the notion of consensus, has come to hold great value, more than $400 billion. In fact, we'd crossed, well, at the time I wrote this, it was 400 billion. We've crossed the 1 trillion boundary since then. So there is a lot of systems out there. There's a lot of value trapped in these or stored in these systems. There are thousands of currencies, maybe 8,000 of coins. And there's a lot of money. I think last time I checked was not January 2017. It was about a year ago. There was $40 billion worth of VC money in blockchain-based companies. And more importantly, I think there was about 20 to 30 billion in people's hard-earned money. This is retail investments in blockchain companies. There are many interesting accomplishments in this space. One of the most exciting for me is in the time I was interested in blockchains, and so that's like the last decade and a little bit, I have personally seen at least half a dozen instances where Gmail went down, where AWS went down, where Facebook went down. And yet during this time, many of these systems never went down. There isn't, Satoshi is not walking around with a pager in his pocket trying to maintain these systems. These systems are inherently more robust than centralized operations that we have seen elsewhere. If I look around at, well, I'll talk about this in a second, but there's a very big change of tide, essentially. We're going from centralized client-server systems to peer-to-peer Byzantine fault-tolerant systems. And these systems are inherent, or can be inherently more robust. And they also bring really interesting people together. I got into this space because I was really excited that there were like really interesting, strange, at times outright bizarre people, as well as, you know, stolid old people from the Bank of England. And I've shared the table with a darknet market operator, as well as people from the Bank of England at the same table. It was amazing. And it's a big social movement with a lot of people excited about it. You all know how crazy some of these communities can be, and you all know how many songs have been written about Bitcoin, and how many songs have been written about Facebook and free software, etc. You know that there's a lot of excitement in this space. What's really happening here at the highest level? Well, we're seeing, as I mentioned, we're witnessing the emergence of practical Byzantine fault-tolerant systems. These systems carry out a function. They carry that function out without a single participant in charge. So people somehow spontaneously organize and they maintain a service that ensures strong integrity guarantees of that said service with some auditability and transparency for anybody to be able to gain to be able to look into the system and gain some amount of assurance that it's working correctly. This begets a new family of applications. These applications span high integrity systems that hold financial records. The easiest accounting thing is keeping track of how many of a resource a certain person has, how many Bitcoins you have, and how many Bitcoins I have. But also more complicated instruments, instruments that relate to finance, options, derivatives, lending instruments, flash loans, and so forth. These are really exciting. And in so doing, we can also do away with or encode into the system corporate structures, trusts, partnerships, things that would normally in the business world require a trusted operator or a trusted middleman to carry out can be done programmatically. So if Ari and I were to start a boy band, the division of the royalties would typically be done by our manager. And I'm sure within a few years, the manager, we would be, and as far as I can tell from the supermarket tabloids, Ari and I would get into a big fight with the manager, and we can do away with people in the middle who don't actually provide that much value other than serve as a trusted entity. The system can take over and be the trusted intermediary. This is amazing. And the high level message I want to leave you with today is that there are lots and lots of exciting, deep scientific contributions in this space. This is not just an application of things we've known. This is the thing that took BFT and made it practical. BFT until now was going down a particular path, a very academic path, and it was a dead end in many ways. And suddenly we're seeing an amazing advance that spans ideas from obviously distributed systems, from networking, cryptography, game theory, program verification, programming languages, and of course, economics. I think my second message that I want to sort of maybe more latently get across is the fact that the dream that Satoshi has shown us is very difficult to achieve with today's protocols. And what I want to give you a glimpse of is a different kind of a protocol for achieving consensus that has properties that are unlike everything else that came before it, that come closer to achieving the dream that got us excited and walking down this path. So I want to talk a little bit about records and bookkeeping. I want to talk to you a little bit about an overview of consensus protocols. And I want to talk about the Avalanche family of consensus protocols, which I view as the third biggest thing that ever happened in this space throughout all history. It only has a history of 45 years, but it's the third biggest thing that happened. It's certainly the biggest thing that happened since the Satoshi white paper. Then I'll just summarize, and then we can just talk a little bit about bookkeeping, and we can talk about anything we want. So how do we generally keep track of records? This is an age-old question, right? We all live in, let's say, some ancient world. We need to keep track of who's rich, who's worked hardest, who's gained the most, and we need to sort of keep tabs on this. One way of doing it is you trust someone to keep the record. Here's the Bank of England. You can trust them. Or you can trust another record keeper like VeriSign. And now the moment you trust a record keeper, you're at the mercy of that trusted entity. You can trust Wall Street to keep tabs on your accounting. I would like to remind all of you that Wall Street failed to do the most basic of accounting just a few years ago. There is the story of the Dole Company. The Dole Company issued 38 million shares in its lifetime. And a few years ago, there was a reason to collect and collate all of the shares outstanding. And suddenly, lo and behold, we got 53 million people saying, I'm a shareholder of the Dole Company. So this entire infrastructure, they can say whatever they want. At the end of the day, they were unable to keep tabs on the most basic thing that they exist to keep tabs on. Now, as for VeriSign, I think we all know what they failed at. They are in a trusted position of authority over the .com space, and they gouge us. You want to buy anything.com, you're going to pay them $8. And that's unconscionable. The cost to them is a fraction of a penny. The cost to you is $8. That's solely because they're the gatekeeper. This is going to repeat itself across time and space. It is not just VeriSign. You replace VeriSign with any other set of human beings, it's going to happen again and again. It's just endemic. If you look, of course, at the Bank of England, they are in a very, very funny position. What they can do is they can inflate the money supply. They are in a position of control over the sole money supply. You and I can scream all day about whatever it is that we want. They do not need to take that into account. So, okay, so then let's take a step back and think a little bit about how, in general, people keep tabs on wealth, on simple records of who's done the best. Well, the simplest thing that I know and that you all know is, of course, gold. It's a precious metal. It's very shiny. It looks very nice. I look at this, and immediately it conjures in me the idea that whoever is holding this stash has worked really hard to attain it. Right? It's inherently valuable. I don't know why that is. If I think about it, though, it's solely because I'm culturally conditioned. I grew up, and when I went to the covered bazaar, it has that shimmer, that gold color to it, or it used to. These days, all of the gold salesmen at the covered bazaar also accept other crypto, including Bitcoin and Avalanche. So it's an interesting situation here. So, but it wasn't always thus. There are other people in the world who believed that these things were valuable. They would look at this and be like, oh my God, somebody spent a lot of time at the beach collecting these valuable stones, or perhaps they spent a lot of time, growing wheat and selling it to other people, etc., to amass a stash of these. And of course, the early money used in China was these knives. Not everyone can forge one of these things. They're standardized. But one of the most interesting stories that I want to very briefly touch upon comes from this island on the island of Yak in the South Pacific. They use these stones known as rice stones. These rice stones are special to them because it's impossible to forge one on this island. This island actually lacks big rocks. What they have to do is they have to go to the island over, that's volcanic, carve out one of these stones and bring it back to their own island, which is a coral island where there are no big rocks like this. And these things served as currency. So if you had one of these, you'd have to carry it around like this. It's a big deal to have one of these things. And then they do with their wealth exactly what we do with our wealth, which is display it. So this is in front of this house. Here is another display. But on occasion, you use these things. I would go to Ari and be like, hey, Ari, I've got 5 of these stones. I want to give you 3 of my rice stones. And then maybe you give me your land. There's a very interesting story from 1863, I believe, where an English anthropologist was stationed on the island. And a group of men went over to the island over, the volcanic island. They carved out a stone. They were coming back. And I'm sure many of you have been on a canoe. It's very tipsy. And on the way back, they dropped the coin into the ocean. When they did, and when they came back to their village, presumably kind of wet and kind of humble, they had a story. They went to the village center and said, look, we did everything we were supposed to do. We went to the island over. We carved out our coin. We did what we're supposed to do. Except, we had a bad thing happen. And it turns out the stone is at the bottom of the ocean. And so upon hearing this, the village elders decided they had a decision to make. And they came up with, I think, what is known as probably as the first case of virtual currency. They said, you know what? We're going to count that rock. We're going to count that coin at the bottom of the ocean. And from that day on, I presumably would be able to say to Ari, hey, Ari, I'm going to give you 2 stones, not 3, 2, plus the one at the bottom of the ocean. Now you own it, and now I have your land. And the trick here, of course, is you want to make sure that everybody on the island has heard of the fact that Ari now owns the stone at the bottom of the ocean. If not everyone hears it, then I could sell the coin. I mean, I could give the coin and buy land from Ari and Veronica at the same time. I would get some land from Ari, some land from Veronica using the same coin, known as a double spend, and that would create a huge problem. So now that takes us to, I think, where we need to be, which is what do we need to achieve to build a proper virtual currency system? We need to achieve consensus. Everybody who's honest, who's participating in the protocol, needs to agree on exactly what happened in history. Okay, so that's our goal. And I will mention it a bit more formally, maybe in a second or so. These are more pictures of these rice stones, but this one is probably the most interesting one. I'm not making the story up. Somebody went and found, I think there's even more than one of these stones at the bottom of the ocean. And as long as you live on a small island where everybody talks a lot, I think you can keep tabs on who's got what. But at some point on a global scale, you will end up needing what is known as a consensus protocol. I think it should be amply clear to everybody by now that what we want to do is we want to keep tabs on a global ledger. A ledger like this will contain entries like such as Alice pays Bob 10 coins, Bob pays Charlie 10 coins, and Charlie pays David 5 of the 10 he owns. That's a reasonably formatted, proper blockchain. Now, how are we going to do this? That's the question. The set of messages, the protocols, sort of the procedures we're going to use for maintaining our shared worldview on this kind of a ledger is known as a consensus protocol. There are many consensus protocols out there. Proof of work is not a consensus protocol. Proof of stake is not a consensus protocol. The protocols involve the set of messages and the procedures we operate to send those messages that altogether construct a proper ledger for us. Proof of work and proof of stake are Sybil control mechanisms. They are the means by which we're going to make sure that we only talk to people we need to talk to. And the reason for why we need Sybil control mechanisms is, imagine that you are in a village on the Pacific, and normally to have a consensus protocol, you want to be talking to everybody in the village. Well, let's say, because let's assume everybody is honest, you want to talk to all of them. What you don't want to do when you go from that world to our current world is suddenly have Veronica show up with a million other Veronicas. And they're all controlled by her, but they confuse me into thinking that all these Veronicas are the set of people I need to be talking to, and suddenly she has much more weight in the protocol than other people. She can fool me, and she can fool other people and cause me to double spend. So we're going to need to couple our consensus protocols with some means of controlling who is part of my village and who is not. This is something I'm going to come back to in a little bit when we talk about the protocols in more detail. The real question here is, how do we do this consensus thing? How do we make sure that all the participants observe the same series of actions? So there's been a lot of research in this area, a lot of research. Ever since the inception of distributed systems, this has been the biggest problem. There have been 2 Turing Awards awarded in this space. Both went to people who made significant advances in consensus protocols. One is Leslie Lamport, the other is Professor Barbara Liskov. Both are amazing people who advanced the state of the science immensely, and they built up what is known as classical consensus protocols. These protocols are used in today's permission systems. They're also getting revamped and revived for adoption into blockchain systems. They're essentially getting updated, if you will. That's the nice way to put it. In many cases, they're just getting a little bit of makeup, and they're getting, protocols from 1999 are being served back to the community as if they are new major breakthroughs. So we see that happen with various different chains. So classical protocols were the name of the game for a long time. And when Satoshi Nakamoto came along in 2009, he knew all about classical protocols. He knew about all of them. He knew about the entire idea. And he discarded the idea because he thought it was not suitable for open permissionless systems used in the wild at internet scale. And so what he did is he invented his own consensus protocol that works differently, that I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. I'm not going to spend too much time on how Nakamoto consensus works. And this was the state of the art until 2 years ago. And I want to take you to the state of the art, and I want to take you a little beyond to avalanche consensus. So how do classical consensus protocols work? So the very first papers in the space are essentially all papers that talk about a parliament. They are trying to, in essence, they're trying to create some kind of a universe where a group of entities are going to be making decisions in unison. Some of these entities might be Byzantine in this particular setting of cryptocurrencies and blockchains. And that creates room for great complications. Now, imagine that you want to make some decisions in something like a parliament, and let's maybe go through some simple protocols that you might want to set up, and let's maybe dispel why or talk about why some approaches are completely unsuitable and why the protocols have the shape and form that they do. So for example, actually before the example, let me just sort of set the framework up. Every one of these consensus protocols will require a read protocol and a write protocol. A write protocol is for making a decision. A read protocol is for querying the state of the system, the state of the universe. Now, if we look at what's going on here, like a parliament, and let's suppose we want to pass a law, we want to say something like, hey, I want to exit the EU. A reasonable write protocol, I'll give you a single write, but I'll give you a simple one. Suppose my write protocol is, I want to message this to all 100 members of the parliament. I want to hear from all 100. And when I do, I will then consider it written. And then you can read from any one of the members of parliament, and they will tell you if we have exited the EU or not. I'll give you a moment to think about whether or not this is a good consensus protocol. I think if you think about it for a second, if I'm writing to 100 people and I'm waiting to hear from all of them, and one of them is evil, then he's going to be able to stop my system. He just won't respond. And now suddenly my system is dead. So you can see that that's a terrible, terrible write protocol. The read protocol is also bad. If there's a single evil person and I happen to read from the evil person, he's going to lie to me, and then I'll make a bad decision. So that was a terrible idea. So we can think about other protocols. If I write to just one person, then that's obviously a bad protocol because there's no guarantee you're going to read from him. That's not going to work. So but maybe it's beginning to dawn on everybody who's listening to this that somehow I need to create some kind of an intersection property for this kind of a system to operate correctly, to maintain safety and liveness in the presence of evil participants. And if you think about it just a little bit more, and I would love to go through it in a little bit more slowly. When I do this for a lecture, we go through it a little bit more slowly. But since I don't have that much time today, I'll just kind of cut to the chase and give you the form of the solution. It turns out that in this particular instance, with the kind of setup that we have, the optimal size of people that I need to write to is 2/3. So what I do, my write protocol looks like this. I write to everybody in the parliament, but I can't afford to wait for everyone. That would be stupid. Just one evil person would trip me up. So I write to everybody, and I wait to hear from 2/3 plus one. That's this blue shaded area. So I know that this many people, these blue people, have agreed that we are leaving the EU. And when you read from 2/3 of the parliament, and sorry, you read from everybody, but you wait you wait until you've heard from 2/3 of the participants. And the reason for the 2/3 being optimal for these kinds of protocols is that the intersection area, this part, is, sorry, the intersection area, it's not that part. I don't know if you can see my little mouse here, but this intersection, if I have 2/3 plus 1 and 2/3 plus 1, if I write to 100 people and I hear back from 67, and you read from 100 people and you wait until you've heard from 67, then the set you're hearing from and the set I have written to will be at least 34 people big by the pigeonhole principle. If you've mastered this pigeonhole principle, you've essentially become an expert in BFT systems. You become half an expert at BFT systems circa a few years ago. Okay, so all of my academic colleagues, they've mastered two little tricks. One trick is you have to make sure there's enough of an intersection so that when I write and you read, there is somebody around to carry the information to you. Now, I constructed this 67 and 67. The intersection is 34. What does that mean? It means that up to 33 people could be evil, but there will always be a 34th person. These 33 could be absolutely horrendous. They could be, people who flip-flop. They could be like whatever, like these Brexiters who are like, I don't know where they stand anymore. But there's always going to be one additional guy in that set of 34. There's going to be 33, at most 33 evil people by construction, plus the extra guy. And this is the guy who's going to be like, wait. Gun said that we decided to exit the EU, and therefore I'm going to carry that message on to the person doing the read. So I hope this is clear. And these classical protocols all have this quorum intersection property where they write to a sizable group and they read from a sizable group, ensuring that there is somebody in the intersection that can carry the message forward. There is an additional complexity, and this is the second part you have to master to become a complete expert in this space circa a few years ago. And that is it is not sufficient for you to hear, as a member of the parliament, it is not sufficient for you to hear that a decision is taking place. Because if Ari is evil, he could send messages to some people and different messages to other people, and he could get the parliament very confused. For you to commit a decision, you have to not only hear of the proposal, but you also have to know yourself that there are 67 people who have heard that 67 other people are about to commit the decision. I hope that makes sense. That little part is a little tricky, and many theses have been written on it. Many theses have contained errors when it comes to that part. Many published papers are actually at fault because they don't really maintain it properly, etc. It's a very colorful area, but it is at the very heart of every consensus protocol, which is this notion that there is enough of a quorum intersection. Each and every one of the members is essentially asking, are there enough of us who've made the decision, who are ready to make the decision to move forward? And when they have convinced themselves, then they move forward. I hope this makes you an expert. I mean, this really literally makes you an expert. You would be able to review papers and reject new breakthroughs that come after you if you wanted to, just having mastered these two little tricks. And Lord knows there are reviewers out there, hello to all of them who have reviewed my papers, just based on the fact that they mastered these two little tricks. So anyway, so that brings you up to speed. That's 2018 BFT. You figure these two things out, the quorum principle and the recursive, the one level of recursion that you need to before you commit anything. And now you can build yourself consensus protocols that maintain safety and liveness. Now, what's wrong with this? Why don't we use these things? Well, I'll give you a moment to think about what I just mentioned. These protocols, they are, they're very nice in many ways, but they don't scale. They don't scale in any shape or form. These protocols were designed from the ground up for very small sets of people making decisions. They require n-squared communication. If there are 100 people, each and every one of those 100 people have to hear from the other 100 people. Why? Because of the second property that I mentioned. I need to know that 67 people are on board with this decision. Well, okay, well, so that's that many messages per decision. And if n people have to talk to n other people for every decision, well, that communication complexity is n squared. So 100 squared is 1,000 messages. No, it's 10,000 messages. Yeah, we could handle that. But if you have 10,000 people, that's 100 million messages. That's a lot. And you really cannot, by the time you collate 100 million messages, it's just the amount of time it takes is going to be incredibly high, and you're going to be in a world of hurt. I did not even talk to you about the complexity of what it takes to change members of the parliament. These systems are typically very fragile. You and I and everybody has to agree on who's in our parliament. If you are writing to one set of people and I'm reading from a different set of people, then the intersection property, the first property I mentioned, goes out the door. So that's obviously going to be a complete failure. So therefore, we need an even more complex protocol for changing the parliament. And many practitioners are unable to get this right. There are wholesale systems out there that are just closed. Private permission systems are typically closed because for the longest time, people couldn't get this part of the protocol implemented correctly. It's well known how to do it. The complexity of the view change protocol for changing members of the parliament is O of n cubed, typically, at least for the simplest protocols that people have implemented that are non-academic, that are non-academic. So these protocols are rather complicated, very fragile, and they just don't scale at heart. The more participants you have, the less the more communication they require. The best of these protocols is a protocol that is first authored by Ted Yin. Ted Yin is one of my graduate students, or was one of my graduate students. He just graduated, actually. And Ted Yin and Dalia Malki and others came up with the best of these protocols. It's called Hot Stuff, and it is used by Facebook's Libra effort, now called Diem. But Diem and Libra target about 100 participants. Okay, so it's going to be Mark Zuckerberg and his 99 best friends. It's not going to be an open system for you and me and everybody else to use. So I wouldn't be interested in the space if I wanted to replace the world's financial, infrastructure with Mark Zuckerberg and 99 of his friends. I want to build open systems. I want to build something where we have the say. I want to build something that is fast, that is robust, that is amazing to use, that does not just turn down into replacing one set of gatekeepers with a different set of gatekeepers. So let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about Nakamoto consensus. So this is indeed the background to which Satoshi Nakamoto came. And his response was, look, this stuff is just, it's not going to scale. It's not suitable for an open deployment. And he came up with his algorithm that I'm not going to go through, that I'm sure you know, which involves building a blockchain via mining. So transactions arrive, transactions are collated into blocks. Blocks are added to the blockchain when a miner comes up with a solution to a hash puzzle. And for doing this, the miner is awarded some number of coins. You can see that this was an old presentation back when the Bitcoin reward was about 50 Bitcoins. It's much less now. But this is the process by which blocks are appended to the ledger. And if somebody wants to modify the past, if somebody wants to say, hey, Alice pays Bob, and now she wants to go back and change history, well, she is going to come up with many more blocks than the rest of the network. It's not many more. She has to come up with one more block than the rest of the network has come up with. But to do that, she needs hash power greater than the rest of the network. And therefore, to double spend, it requires a 51% of the hash power to change the record on Nakamoto consensus. This is a huge breakthrough, an amazing breakthrough. It's a brilliant system. What's brilliant about it? It observes that you can have a probabilistic system that can hold great value. About more than $1 trillion are stored in Bitcoin. That's an immense amount of value stored probabilistically. This gets under the skin of some academics. They want their protocols to give them full guarantees, not probabilistic guarantees. Those academics are clueless because they don't realize that every single machine, including my cell phone here, essentially is a probabilistic device. The cell phone doesn't always operate correctly. In fact, this very one is very faulty. But every single chip you use is probabilistic. So we live in a probabilistic world, and therefore the one of the most amazing things that Satoshi ever did was to say, look, 1 minus epsilon is about as good as 1, probability 1, when you make epsilon small enough. And that's exactly what he did. And that's what allowed him to come up with this amazing new infrastructure. There is no view change protocol. There are no voters. That takes a second to sink in. There are miners, sure, but there are no voters. You don't need anybody's permission to participate in the system. There is no view change happening. There is no voting happening on the blocks. You just come up with a block, you'll follow the protocol, and you'll build the blockchain. Of course, there are some complications known as selfish mining attacks, which Itai Ayal and I co-discovered, that get into play, and it turns out it's not really quite 51%. 34% can actually attack these systems, but leaving those aside, these systems are still very robust and very open and scalable in the number of miners. So that's a pretty nice situation to be in. Well, what's wrong with them? Why don't we use Bitcoin for everything? I'll skip this part. Why don't we use Bitcoin for everything? We could. Back in the day when this came up, people started using these machines, then they started using these machines, then these things, these are FPGAs. Then we went to ASICs. This is, I believe, somebody's dorm room where your electricity is free. I don't want to give anybody any ideas. My colleagues at CMU discovered a whole data center underneath their data center when they were remodeling it, where somebody had placed a whole bunch of Bitcoin miners underneath the floorboards. This is mining industry from 6 years ago, fly-by-night Chinese operation, all hokey. Here's another one in the Philippines. That one ended up burning down. So those of you who are OCD, kind of like me, who are unnerved by this tangle of wires, you can rest easy. They got what was coming to them. They all burnt down. See, here's the same tangle right here. They got what they deserved for wiring so badly. Here is another one. I think this one's in the Ukraine. This is a modern one. What the heck are these things doing? They're not processing transactions. They're all racing to solve these stupid puzzles. The more of these things you have, it's not the case that the platform moves faster. The platform moves at the speed it moves. Bitcoin comes up with a block every 10 minutes. No matter how many of these units you add, what you're doing is you're competing with the other miners to make those coins, but you're not actually speeding the system up. It's not that kind of a system. Okay, so and so in so doing, as these miners are incentivized to compete with each other and consume more and more energy, we end up soaking up an immense amount of energy. I'm talking to you from a location that is 42 Celsius, even as I speak. So if I'm sweating and I look like I'm in a sauna, it's because we have heated the world up. And the amount of energy we're consuming right now, again, this slide has become dated in no time. I think it's at least on par with Austria. It's 2 Denmarks, 3 Irelands, and if you want to visualize it, it's 4 nuclear power plants are going into crypto mining. This is a huge waste. All of that energy could go into anything else, just about anything else, and it would be more useful for humanity. We do not need all of this energy being spent the way it is being spent to keep tabs on the Bitcoin blockchain. Okay, so there are some people out there who think that the amount of energy we burn adds value to Bitcoin. It doesn't. It does not establish a price floor. It might be very expensive for you to dig out gold. It doesn't mean gold will have that value. If there is a lot of surplus gold in the world, its value will crash. It'll be unfeasible for you to dig it out, but it doesn't mean that there's a price floor for the shiny rocks you've got. This thing is an environmental disaster. It's literally melting the poles. It's literally killing endangered animals. And there are many people out there who are selfish. I would like to think I'm not one of them. Who are like, I got mine, screw you. I'm happy with what I get out of it. Well, okay, you want to build a system that stores value, where you're leaking an enormous amount of value out of your system to the power companies. And this shrinks the feasible envelope for the coins. I shudder to think what might happen if the Bitcoin price falls a lot, then we're going to be in a world of hurt for the system to recover. So where are we now? So oh, sorry, I should mention this. So, okay, what do we get for this? We get an open protocol. That's nice. We get a robust protocol. That's super nice. But we also get a very slow protocol. Bitcoin's on-chain throughput is about 3 transactions per second. Latency is 60 minutes. You can tweak these parameters. You can make your blocks bigger. You can make your blocks more frequent. Ethereum makes them more frequent. It mints blocks every 14 seconds, which it turns out is actually not a good number. It means that you cannot be in far corners of the world. You have to be well connected to be an Ethereum miner that's successful. And it also ends up achieving only 15 transactions per second. And so even at these speeds, we are seeing signs of lack of decentralization in the Ethereum blockchain. We did a study on this a few years ago. You can't just tweak parameters on the Nakamoto consensus front to cover all the use cases. IoT, microtransactions, other NFTs alone place very, very high demands. Somebody who does Major League Baseball, for example, will deal with the transaction throughput, will have to deal with the transaction throughput that just cannot be done at these speeds. So, and then there's also this, let me just mention this parting shot. So we're doing all this. We're doing all this to do what? To get an open system that gives us a decentralized, open, robust infrastructure. Well, then do we get that? That's worth a look. How many miners are there in Bitcoin? Well, there are a lot of miners, but they pool, they collaborate, they end up organizing themselves into mining pools, and there are only about 19 of them for Bitcoin. At the time we did this study, there were about 12 of them for Ethereum that accounted for 99% of the block production. So at the end of the day, these people end up colluding together, and you have only a handful of entities that are creating your blockchain anyway. So they're piss poor at decentralization. They're terrible at scaling. They're terrible at performance. They're terrible at latencies. Terrible at throughput. But they are open and robust. That's kind of nice. So it surely would be nice if we could somehow combine the best of these two worlds. If we could have the quick finality of classical protocols without the terrible overheads, the n-squared overheads, without having to require precise membership, without having to make them closed or small. And it would certainly be nice to have the robustness of Nakamoto combined with low latency, high throughput, and scalability. And of course, you didn't have to waste all that energy. So how do we do that? Well, I think at this point, about 3 years ago, in 2018, a paper was released from a team called Team Rocket. And Team Rocket came up with a new family of protocols. They work differently. So classical protocols are protocols in which every node is trying to maintain the quorum invariant by hearing from essentially not every other, but on the order of every other node. Okay, so it's like all-to-all voting protocols. If you look at Hedera Hashgraph, if you look at Cosmos, if you look at ETH2, these are all classical protocols. They're trying to resurrect ideas from the 90s, late 90s, early noughts, and adopt them into the blockchain setting to get, to essentially get away from proof of work. That's a laudable goal, but they're by doing so, they're actually giving up on all of these things that we think are crucial, which is openness, which is high performance, which is scalability. So Avalanche is different. It's going to operate differently, and I'll give you the hint on how it operates. It's a sampling-based voting protocol. You don't actually get to ask everybody. You ask a small sample, and you don't, unlike classical, maybe the latency might be a little higher actually, because you don't just do it in a small number of, well, you do it in a small number of rounds, but you don't do it in like just 2 rounds. You do it in slightly more often, but as a result, you end up being able to scale to immense numbers of participants. So there are multiple protocols in this family of protocols. They're inspired by epidemic protocols or gossip protocols. Those of you who've heard of these terms will know that these are protocols for dissemination of news or dissemination of new information. And they've been used everywhere. Just about every website uses a gossip network behind the scenes. This is kind of like that, but it's solving a far harder problem. It's not just disseminating information. It's making sure that every participant that is correct sees the same set of decisions and the system remains up and live as long as the system is, as long as the liveness guarantees are met, the liveness properties are met. I'll talk about them in a second. So the goal here is quick finality, very, very low latency, high throughput. It should scale to millions of nodes. It should be robust. It should be green and sustainable. And so what's the trick? The trick is you don't force everybody to talk to everyone. Imagine that I'm in a Senate. Imagine that the Senate isn't just 100 people. Imagine it's 100,000 people in a giant stadium. I could, if I were doing the classical thing, I could ask everyone and collect responses. It would take forever. It would be very time consuming. It would be, and the view change would be insane. Every time someone comes into the stadium, I have to do an n cubed operation, which is infeasible. It just wouldn't work at that scale. Instead, I'm going to sample and query members of the stadium. They themselves will do the same thing. And magically, because I'm sampling you all and you're sampling me and other people, and by sampling Ari, I'm getting the benefit of the people that he has sampled. And maybe he sampled Veronica, he sampled Arthur, who's part of the stadium, etc. And that we ensure the kind of coverage we want probabilistically. And we'll create a metastable system, a system that is unstable as long as a decision is not made. And we will try to make the system essentially, in fact, we'll set up a kind of a dynamic that's going to fall into one side or the other. The system will not want to be in an indecisive state. It will want to quickly come to an agreement on whether something happened or it did not happen. So how does it work? Well, okay, so let me go back to my example. Let me give you a hint of how it works for the very simplest of the protocols in the family. There are multiple, and I'm sure there are many more to be discovered to come after us. But I'll give you the core idea of how it works, and I hope it's useful. Imagine that we're in this giant stadium. Imagine that we want the stadium participants to come to a decision. We want them to say either blue or green. We want all the correct nodes to pick one color. It doesn't matter which color we pick, but we want every good, nice person to pick the same color. So we say, look, there'll be some evil people in the stadium. That's okay. We'll deal with them. We'll say, look, if you're a nice person and follow the protocol as follows, the protocol is going to be very simple. We're going to do the same dumb thing over and over and over again. What's that dumb thing? Pick 5 people at random from the audience. Okay, so pick 5 people from the stadium and then query what color preference they currently have. If they don't have a color, then they adopt the color that you've got. If they have heard of this, like we're trying to make a decision, blue or green, leave the EU or stay within the EU, we're going to go left or right. It's like that kind of a binary decision. Let me just simplify the discussion by looking at the binary case. So I'm going to go left or right with with my stadium. And the way I'm going to do this is as a participant, I'm going to ask 5 people, hey guys, I heard that somebody wants to leave the EU. What do you think? And I ask Ari, Veronica, Arthur, and 2 other people. And I get back responses. And Veronica might say, yeah, I heard the same thing. I'm down to leave the EU. Ari might say, no, I heard earlier from somebody else who wants to stay within the EU. I object. And he says green instead. And so I get back responses, blue, green, blue, blue, green. And so when I hear this, what I do as a correct participant to this protocol is I adjust my own preference to be on the side of the majority of my sample. It's that simple. I sample 5, I go with the majority. And I'm going to repeat this stupid, simple process some number of times. Now, if you think about it globally, if you look at this entire system from a very, very, from a God's eye view, the very worst thing that could happen here is I start out life right in the middle. 50% are favoring blue, 50% are favoring green. That's the worst thing that can happen. And after one round of this, I'm going to sample some people. I don't know who, I just picked them at random. Ari samples people, Veronica samples people, everybody, Arthur does the same thing, we all sample. It is incredibly unlikely that after one round of random samples, I'm going to be exactly 50-50. It's possible, And if it does happen, then this process will repeat itself. It's exponentially less likely to happen again and again and again. I'm not going to stay here. It's very, very unlikely. What will happen, most likely, is because of random perturbances, one side will be slightly more favored than the other side. So I sample, I get blue. Veronica samples, she gets blue. Ari samples, he gets green, and so on. And let's say that we are slightly more blue than green at the end of the first round. I'm going to repeat this sample. And now you can see that if I have a small bias in the network, it's going to amplify itself. If I'm 51% ahead on the blue side, next sample is going to take me a little bit further towards the blue. And so I might go to 53% blue. And if I do this again, I'll go from 53, simulations show that you go to something like 56. Next thing takes you to 61. And then suddenly there's a cliff and you start going down this cliff. So you start out in the fully bivalent state and you go very quickly towards one edge or the other of this hat or this snake that has swallowed an elephant, whatever you want to look at it as, but down this energy gradient to a lower energy state for the network. And at some point, there exists a point of no return. And let me, I don't want to go through the complicated Markov chain analysis that is behind this, but let me just give you the simple intuition. Imagine that you are the only blue in a stadium of green people. You are guaranteed to, in the next round, you're guaranteed to turn green yourself. So you can work backwards and you can see that there is that if you are towards the edges of this, the outer edges, then the system will actually remain at that. Once the entire network is green, then it's just decided green now. There is no chance or hope or anything else of anybody flipping this. It's immutable. The decision has been made. This is really cool. It's a different kind of a system. We are not sampling the whole network. It's amazing in the number of messages it sends. It turns out that, okay, let me just mention this. If there could be some number of people in the system who are Byzantine, they're playing tricks with you. And when the network is going towards the green side, they pull you back to the blue, etc. Well, you can compute exactly when there is a phase shift. There's a point beyond which the Byzantine guys are unable to pull you back. So I'm simplifying I talked to you about the slush protocol, actually. The snowball protocol is actually the one that handles these Byzantine participants. I don't have enough time to go into the details or the math. It would not be appropriate for this audience, but you can see that that decisions could be made this way. And I can illustrate this with pictures, but let's just kind of skip through this. It's okay. The network. This is a more insightful graph. The network starts out in a fully bivalent state and makes a decision. And this shows that I think this was a case where the network picked red. Everybody became red. This is the 0 point. It's shown badly on this graph, but the 0 point is right here. There are no blues left inside the network. There are many different protocols in here: slush, snowflake, snowball, and avalanche. I will not go into the details. The protocols themselves can be specified on a single slide. These are really simple. So I shudder to think about the complexity of Cosmos's view change. This thing is incredibly robust. Let's suppose that Veronica knows 1,000 more people who are in the audience in the stadium, and I know like 500 people less than her or whatever. That's okay. It turns out that this protocol is quite robust. My sampling will cover enough people who cover enough people who cover the people Veronica knows, etc. And vice versa for her. She's going to get the coverage she needs without having to sample everybody. That's really everything I wanted to say. There are some advances here. We can make all sorts of fancier additions to these protocols. There are all sorts of theorems one could talk about, but I'm going to sort of save them. And there's this cool trick one can do with a directed acyclic graph where you don't make one decision at a time, where you chain your decisions so that my spend is predicated on, my spend, I suppose I'm D, my spend to Z right here on the left is predicated on the other money I spent earlier to E, which is predicated on Alice paying Bob, and the network can make a decision down this path, and we can pick all of these things all at the same time without having to individually and separately make a decision for each. This is a very cool idea. It allows us to amortize the cost of a decision over a larger number of transactions. So these are just some of the tricks that we use to make the avalanche system perform far, far, far beyond anybody else. And so at this level, I think I just want to wrap up in the next 1 minute or so. This thing is incredibly efficient because you're not talking to everybody, and it's very quick. It turns out, because these kinds of exponential processes, kind of like pandemics and so on, you know how exponential growth works. It's very quick. About 17 rounds is sufficient for a network of 10,000 nodes. So 17 rounds, and 17 rounds only means 170 messages. So 10,000 nodes would require 100 million messages if we tried to use a classical protocol like PBFT. And instead, we're getting 170 messages per node, and we're achieving consensus. So there are lots of cool things that we could talk about. I'm not going to get into. It's very strong immutability. So people who've tried to replace proof of work with proof of stake, they're talking about, essentially leaving behind 19 mining pools or 11 mining pools, replacing them with 21 block producers and EOS, 64 for Casper, 128 for ETH2. These are tiny numbers of participants per decision. In Avalanche, you can have tens of thousands, you can have millions of participants. There's another cool thing about this. This protocol can guarantee safety for a network where more than half the participants are Byzantine. Now, it cannot guarantee liveness when more than half the people are evil, but it guarantees safety. So what does that mean? Even if 60% of the network is corrupted, they cannot cause a double spend if you parameterize it for this kind of a world. That's a pretty amazing thing to be able to say. Whereas classical protocols break down when a third of the participants are evil, this thing is not like that at all. If you have just compromise, if the protocol is parameterized for a Byzantine component of 33%, and the attacker is 34%, he breaks through your guarantees, your probabilities, but he doesn't immediately cause a double spend. In fact, numbers show that, at least with the parameterization we have, a double spend is incredibly unlikely. It's only likely to happen once in 20,000 years or so for one parameterization we did. And if the attacker is 34%, sure, he kills it. That guarantee goes out the door. But what does that mean? Well, now he can cause a double spend once every 10,000 years. He really needs something like 60% to have a good chance of, a good meaning, like, something in the double-digit percentages chance of causing a double spend. So it's robust, etc., etc. I'm going to just skip these parts. And I should mention this. You could use this with anything. You could use it with proof of work. You could use it with proof of stake. You could use it with proof of authority. It's up to you. The choice of a Sybil function, Sybil control function, is up to you, and it's immaterial. In the Avalanche system, we use proof of stake because we believe in green stuff. We don't believe in killing the earth. We want to have the system live forever, and we want to have it live in a nice world that we occupy and our children occupy.
Hey, Gund, one more minute.
Okay, let me just finish up then. So, right. We have other things like this, like governance inside. I'm not going to talk about it. And we built this thing. It's now running. It's holding multiple $billion worth of value. And it's very fast. I always advertise 1 to 2 seconds per decision. It's actually less than a second. It's actually around 300 milliseconds per decision. If you ever played with Avalanche, you can never go back to Ethereum. Ethereum takes many seconds, even though they try to hide it. The decisions are taken. For it to be really full, Arthur Gervais can tell you exactly how long it should take. It should take about 37 minutes, according to his thesis. Avalanche makes a decision in 300 milliseconds. It's super fast. The throughput is very high, And, where do I want to leave you at? I think I want to leave you with this. There is a very exciting future ahead involving decentralized systems that can tolerate Byzantine behaviors. The last word on blockchains has not been written. And do not be confused by the people who got stuck on the first word. The first word is Bitcoin. It gave us the vision. It's an amazing system. And Satoshi was a very, very brilliant researcher. All that being said, he was by no means the last person or the only smart person in this area. And there are many, many other advances that have come after it. A lot of the misconceptions I hear about blockchains being slow, being unscalable, being this, that, and the other, They are things of the past. There have been advances here that took the science far forward, and now we can make decisions in far less than a second in a globally decentralized network with thousands of participants and hold immense amounts of value. So I hope you will join us in this dream of realizing a decentralized world. I hope we will all together, jointly, fight people who will adopt portions of the dream and discard the very central core of decentralization. I have in mind systems that are stealing essentially the ETH idea, that are putting it on a blockchain with a centralized gatekeeper in charge. Those are, I think, the true enemy. And working together, we can build decentralized systems that are fast and scalable. I'm going to stop there, and thank you all very much for bearing with me today.